No.
Can I have
Sort of luxury.
a motion to approve the minutes from the October 24th meeting?
I'll move to
I'll
approve
second.
them.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, moving on to the policy review, number 1, fiscal management policy. Chase, Adam, Matthew.
Yeah, I'll introduce it and then ask Adam to talk a little bit more about the specifics too. But well, first of all, good evening, everybody. We have a financial metrics policy in front of you there. This is something that I think used to live in some of the old superintendent directions when we were in a different governance model. And then again, when we switched to policy, some of these specifics about what you would like to direct me and the team to try to do from a budget planning process, those specific indicators aren't in there. And so it seemed wise when we got the primer from IASB that we would look at this and have this in place. And I think it guides some of our conversations. And obviously the last time we were all together, some of the work ahead of us, this will be important to have a benchmark in place. So the highlighted portions where the district can make some decisions about what they would like to do or where we would set those goals. We did put some recommendations in there, and that's what we believe are based off some of the best practice information given to us. But there is, of course, some flexibility in there, but I kind of want Adam to just walk through why those numbers are where they are in those percentages, and then answer any questions you guys might have about terminology and there are differences. You want to take it from there, Adam?
Yeah, so these, and I alluded to these, I think, when we were at our last board meeting, but unspent authorized budget ratio. So essentially, we're looking at what is that percentage that we would like our unspent authorized budget to exceed our allocation for that current year. And recommendation is that this is kept anywhere between 5 and 15%, but typically for larger districts, you see this number on the lower end of that range. So that's why we identified that 5 to 10% range, which for us, based upon an annual budget of roughly $200 million at 5%, we'd be talking about $10 million to $20 million on the high end. That would be our unspent authorized budget. So that's where that 5 to 10% came from. Again, it's within sort of the guidance that we get from organizations like ISFIS, but kind of at the lower range, which does reflect, again, the size of our system and the limited likelihood that we would see a sudden shock of a really high dollar value that would require us to have somewhere in the 15% or beyond range. So our recommendation there is that 5 to 10%. The next one is really talking about categorical fund balances. So this is something the state's looking at more closely. They'd like to see categorical fund balances brought down close to 0% or to 0% at the end of most years. And so the recommendation here of 0 to 5 really does reflect, again, not strictly 0, because we do want to have some flexibility. Let's say that we have a major professional development initiative coming up in a couple years. We may want to have some carryover in TQ funds to be able to fund that. But at the same time, the state has given us flexibility to transfer to a flexibility account at the end of the year and leverage those resources. So that's where we end up there. And then solvency ratio, I also mentioned last month. But that one is, or last meeting rather, but that one is related to essentially our cash flow. So what is our cash level relative to our annual budget authority? And so that, again, we're looking at that 10 to 15%. This is generally recommended to be higher than your UAB with a floor set at whatever your unspent balance is. The reason for that is you want to actually be able to spend all of the money that you have the authority to spend. And if you don't have the cash to meet that minimum authority level, then you don't have the cash to spend it. So that's where that 10 to 15% comes from. It's a little bit higher than the recommendation for UAB. And then setting 5% as a minimum with 5% corresponding to the minimum UAB floor there. Solvency is a little bit easier to address as an issue for school districts than unspent authorized budget, simply because we have the ability to levy cash reserve. And so we can address solvency ratio by reducing expenditures or by increasing revenues, and one way to increase revenue that doesn't increase authority but does increase cash is cash reserve levy. So that's an important one to look at as we are looking at establishing what our cash reserve levy will be for each year. And then finally, the last one is related to that solvency ratio and the point that I made about being able to spend your entire authority. So the district, we would recommend we add this one as number 4, would take reasonable steps to achieve a total general fund balance at least equal to its unspent authority. So that's what that's referring to there. It's kind of a quick overview. Happy to answer any questions.
I mean, I would be happy to see an unspent authorized budget of 5-6%. It hasn't been 6% since fiscal year 2017. So I mean, I agree with all of your numbers here. And the solvency ratio, yeah, it'd be great if we had that at 10%. I don't see anything that's any more than 10%. One question I did have was the instructional support levy. Are we maxed out on that?
We
Are
are.
we doing the full 10%?
We do, yeah.
Okay.
It's a little bit confusing if you look at the instructional support levy because a lot of districts levy that entirely through
Through
property tax, and we
instead of
use an
income share tax,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
So it's a little confusing when you look at the numbers, but we are at our max.
So Jane, would you mind sharing what your thinking is for the targets that you have in mind here?
I mean, I agree with what Adam is proposing. It would be great if we were at 10%. That's a little bit ambitious though, right? So I was saying that I'd be happy if we were at 5-6%,
For unspent.
right?
Mhm.
Because we haven't
And,
been good
and
at-
5 to 6% is actually quite a lot of money.
It is.
And 10% almost seems like, I don't know, too much to have just there.
Yeah, sort of in, to me, the ideal situation, because you're going to have fluctuations. You're going to have
Yeah.
fluctuations where you launch new programs or you have to add a school or whatever the case. And so you're going to see situations where you see that unspent budget drop. But ultimately, you'd prefer those fluctuations to happen between, let's say, 5 and 10%, rather than between 0 and 5%, which is kind of where we've been.
Yes.
That's what it sounds like. It sounds like it's like an aspirational, it's like a message to people to aim high, but we won't want to necessarily get that high.
Right, yeah.
Well, and there's definitely a tipping point. I think that's what you guys are talking about, right? If we're sitting on too many resources and not using them, that's not great for
Yeah.
kids either, right? And so I think it's a balance, and oftentimes in larger districts, you do see that number lower than you would in smaller ones. And sometimes there's compelling reasons for that they can't be as nimble if they do have to reduce some things, or, a little bit trickier to maybe spend down some of that all of the time. But for us, I think being as thin as we have, we know that's not a good position to be in, right? It constantly puts us in a precarious spot, so.
Well, there are some districts with huge unspent
Yeah.
balances, which is, they're acting like bank.
Mhm.
And the legislature is using that as a reason to.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying, and that hurts us all, right, in the
Yeah.
conversation, because it's
Yeah.
like, well, there's plenty of money out there, look at all these
Mhm.
fund balances, right? Yeah.
How does that happen? How do these districts, I mean, we've talked about it in the abstract a lot since I've been involved in district stuff. Why do some smaller districts have so much extra money? I know it seems like a dumb question, but I don't know the answer.
I don't think it's
Oh,
Very
okay.
good question.
Why do, because I mean, if I drive to West Branch, that school's gorgeous, I'm so happy for them. And I just think to myself, is that an example of a place that just has tons of money that they get to spend and they have extra sitting around? How's that work?
Remember, we can't judge it by facilities though, right? Because we know our capital funds are separate from general
Yeah.
fund, and so when we're looking at this balance, we're really talking about that almost more of what happens on the programming end or
They
the
gotta
people
staff
end,
that
right?
giant building.
Yeah.
Right. But they
It's a big
probably,
building.
but they don't pay
They don't
teachers
pay.
as
Yeah,
well.
that's-
Yeah, they don't
that's-
pay as
Year
well.
after year of not
Yeah.
paying
So
people,
that's-
they continually
To build it
accumulate
up.
it, and it builds, and it builds,
Okay.
and it builds, and it builds.
That's what I
They don't
wondered.
pay- They don't pay people.
Some communities are at that sweet spot where they've got, their classes or sizes are like 30 instead of having 2 classes of 20, right? They're
They
just,
choose to
the
have-
community is at,
Yeah.
just is that perfect size where the class sizes, they can have 1 class of 30 rather than
Yeah.
having if they have 40 kids and have 2 classes of 20.
But that's why, again, the teachers aren't as happy in those places, and I know places like Kyoto didn't have a 6th grade teacher last
Yeah.
year.
Yeah,
Because of that, right?
Right.
They're pushing the limits.
yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense to me.
And what I heard at the school board convention as well is that because of the staffing shortage, they're actually not able to fill a lot of their positions, and that's why they have.
Okay.
And I think that's a little bit of a, probably, and I don't want to criticize other districts here, but I'd say that's a recent excuse. I mean, I think some of the problem is what Brady's talking about is they haven't had to pay more, and so they don't, and so they accumulate some things. You know, could they be doing other programming potentially, right?
Yeah.
Could you be paying your staff more potentially? There could
Have
be
more
compelling reasons they
supports.
want to also have a healthy, you know, financial position, but I do think that's where there's some truth to the criticism about, you know, districts that have built up these huge war chests, and then why isn't that money been
Yeah.
distributed back to staff or to services to kids? I mean, that hurts us all. That's that point that Jane was making before. But they're in a smaller place. You also don't have as much programming to probably provide for, you know, a fewer amount of students. So I do think there's probably some realism to the fact there's only so many places they could spend the money, and if you're not investing it in your people to raise the salaries, where do you go? Where do you spend that money, right? If they've continued to be okay with their association and settling at a lower number, you are going to keep accumulating that. There are also a lot of times, I'm sure districts small are worried about what happens if their enrollment starts to decline, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably some of the reasoning they're giving people about why they need to have, you know, a healthier balance, because if their enrollment declines, they're in trouble in a hurry, right?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, generally, probably the partnership isn't anything like what we have in
Yeah.
terms of administration and association. I mean, not even close. It's much more adversarial. And then that just makes it hard for everybody when it is that adversarial, so.
You'll always be able to hire teachers if you pay them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, exactly, yeah. And it's just, yes, there's a very different environment. And they'll consider it like a rainy day fund. I mean, they're also a small district thinking like, okay, I guess the volume scales is also quite
That's
different, so.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I've just always kind of wondered how that boiled down.
I was thinking about my negotiations experience in a smaller district, and it was kind of the board president writing down a number on a piece of paper and sliding it across, and told us that's what it was going to be. So,
Really?
I mean, that, you know, that's obviously we have a much different process here about how it works. So, yeah, we'll just have Ruthina deliver that to you. Yeah,
Right.
right. Yeah.
type it out.
Yeah, well, yeah, Chase will type it out.
And, you know, some of this starts with school boards too, because in some districts, you know, there are people who get elected to school board just not to raise taxes, not. Like, it's not about, it's just, I might own a lot of land and I don't want to see my property taxes go up, so I'm going to be on the school board. And it, you know, we just also live in a different political climate where folks who get elected are, you know, generally, you know, think about the role the association plays in sort of vetting candidates and asking questions and the engagement with the community. It just isn't that way all over the state, and so it all trickles down, and when 80-some% of your budget is going to staff, that's really where a lot of this falls.
And to that point, there's actually a mechanism districts can use to transfer general fund resources for property tax relief. And the tools, the budgeting tools that I've seen even warn you, don't put something other than 0 in this, you know, area unless you really feel strongly about it. But, you know, that's one of the things, to your point, if somebody wants to free up general fund resources by not paying people, that's a way you can actually use those to directly lower property taxes.
I will say that's why I like the flexibility going up to 10%, is because I think that gives us some maneuvering, but I also think if we were constantly at 10%, the association during negotiations
Yeah.
is very keen and very aware of that and would say, absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's time to push that out to our people. So I just don't think there's a world in which we ever live consistently at 10%.
Yeah.
Unless there's something we're saving for that
Yeah.
we can say, no, it's here because
Right.
of that. But I think you guys are a good check on
Yeah.
us getting too high on that number.
There might be some school board members who will check on that too.
You were a very good check.
Might be.
Yeah.
But I do think we've been so lean that it puts us in these tough situations to
Yeah.
make these really hard decisions year after year. So we have to find what our sweet spot is in that.
Any other questions on that one?
Let's move over to policy primers.
Yeah, go ahead. I was gonna say,
So,
if you have anything you want to say.
Sure,
at the
this
top.
is just, there, as it says, we included the fall update, you can see at a glance, as it says, equal employment, and a couple of things related to student conduct that are really flowing from the legislation that came out. Nothing really major here for us because of some of the policies and practices we already had in place with regard to student discipline. So more just some cleanup action. The one sentence that we added was a reference to, at the end of the policies, it always says it's the superintendent's responsibility to set the regulations, and so we put it right there in policy that this lives in our comprehensive behavior approach, because that's our document that we go to for consistency across our buildings, and it really lines out what we want to do in different situations at all levels and at all buildings. And so that's the add that we brought to these policies. But other than that, we kept these pretty verbatim from what the state sent us. So happy to entertain any questions. Like I said, most of this came to us from ISB, so I might not have the full answers for you.
So does IASB, have they, I don't see it here in this language. I'm not sure about their past or present, what their information is. Do they look at student conduct from the perspective of disparities in student discipline based on race and ethnicity?
Well, this, I don't know, how do we report that data? Do we have to report our discipline?
I don't think the school
Yeah,
board
I don't think the school
association
board
is,
association
I mean,
does.
the school board's association role is to give, policy that's consistent with code. And so oftentimes when they're developing the policy suggestions for districts, they're just taking the legislative changes and reflecting that back into policy. So as Chase was saying, I mean, for us locally, knowing that we care about that, then we go to our comprehensive behavior approach that guides that work, right? That's been our tie-in to make sure that we feel that those policies are as equitable as they can be, in the enforcement of those. So I'm not sure, I mean, I don't think they probably, I can't think of an example where they would specifically write something like that into policy, Charlie, in that end.
Well, in my view, they're just missing the reality of what's happening in state schools.
And I'm not sure the school board association is as much as probably where your frustration lies is what's coming from the legislature that then is being, put through in a primer from them.
I have Charlie, are you done with that?
Sure.
Okay. One thing I thought I'd just flag, and maybe people are fine with it, but this is on it's a narrative form, it's page 15, code 503.8 R1, page 15. And it's the last one on that page, considerations for determining the maturity of the student. The last sentence of that says the administration will consider the following factors in determining the maturity of the student. That's pretty exclusive language compared to even what is used in the rest of this document. It can say, like, for example, if you look at the next provision, there's language that says will consider among other things. I would suggest that the administration will consider among other things the following factors. It's pretty nuanced anyway to talk about the maturity of the student, so I'd like to leave it more flexible about what the considerations could include.
What about at least?
I don't care what it says, as long as it's not exclusive of other
Right.
things.
Yeah.
Use whatever language you want. I was just using
Yeah.
what they used in the following one.
Right.
I would just say,
Me too.
in terms of editorializing, it's just, these are written very average. As you read them, you think to yourself, this is what our, people are supposed to go to know how to know what their rights are, their children's rights are, or even a school board member or administrator. These aren't written very well. and that's not our fault, it's just disappointing, and I just wanted to point that out, that if you feel that way, I feel that way too. So yeah, that would be the only thing I flagged on that document, I think.
The only reason why I say at least instead of among other things is among other things to me suggests that you also have to consider other things in addition to those three, whereas at least says you have to do these three, and then with it's the discretion of the team to consider other things. And I don't want to create a situation where somebody complains that you had to consider something that they actually didn't have to, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But at least I think gives them the flexibility to get what your concern is, that they at least have to consider age, grade level, student disability, and then anything else. Yeah.
And then the other one, page 17, when it talks about the instructional materials, is this different than significantly different than what we were already doing?
No.
No.
The only change there is
That's
the,
Take the student out.
yeah, is the
6A.
number and removing the
6,
students
right.
from it,
Okay,
yeah.
I was just making sure I understood that correctly. And having gone to that book review we did, what do we call it, the
Objection to instruction.
reconsideration. Yeah, that was, it couldn't have gone better. Lucas, you did a good job. It was good. So we know what we're doing on that, no surprise.
And I would just maybe suggest on that page 17, instead of among other things at least. I think it's just a little bit clear, because then among other, well, what are the other things? And there's not an answer for that question in the code, or in the policy.
You're back on the one previous, Lisa?
On both, on both of them, on the one that doesn't have any language at all, and then on the next one that Mary Kay, on page 16.
Under the first
Yeah.
one, considerations for determining whether the off-campus threat of violence or incident of
Oh,
violence.
just do the same thing
Yeah,
there.
Yeah.
at least, and then the
Okay.
language mirrors each other too, so.
Yep.
It's just tighter.
Okay, is everybody comfortable moving on to the budget series?
Okay.
Jane?
So 400's personnel, Nick and Adam did the heavy lifting on this series. I believe they've highlighted a couple ones where we saw some significant, and not some significant, but some changes we'd like to at least point out to you. I'll defer to Nick and to Adam on those, and then anything else that they might want to point out in this series.
Yep, the first one that we had substantial changes, in fact, almost a replacement of the policy, is 401.7, which is related to employee travel compensation. And the key there is that what we are looking at is for meal and incidental costs, rather than requiring detailed receipts and reimbursing based upon those costs delineated on receipts. We would utilize federal meal and incidental per diem rates and reimburse at a per diem based upon travel dates and destination. Number of reasons that we would look at doing that. Obviously, that'll simplify the process, both for the employee who is traveling and as well as for district staff who are processing those requests for reimbursement. But then there are a handful of other reasons. This clarifies some ambiguities. It relates to the first and last day of travel, what meals are covered, creates some additional flexibility for traveling employees as it relates to how to cover meals that are not the traditional breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which is how we've delineated reimbursements previously. So if you're traveling, you get this per diem amount per day, and if you spend that on coffee at the airport, that's fine. And so, avoid some of those complexities that we've had previously. And then the changes, I'll just jump really quick to this because they're related. The changes to 401.7G1, which are district travel guidelines, are only to reflect those changes made in the previous policy regarding the per diem and the lack of need to submit receipts for those. The reasons that we wouldn't look at a per diem for things like airfare and lodging are primarily because we prefer that those mostly be made with district purchase cards or other district mechanisms anyway. So for the most part, employees traveling do not need reimbursement for those expenses to begin with. If they did incur those personally, they would still need to submit those detailed receipts as they do now.
Huge fan of this, because this is how I get reimbursed, as well as Jane, because you're a Fed employee too. So, and it works really well, it's really smooth. The one thing that I'd like to add that we do at my work is on the travel request, we have to indicate if meals are provided at the destination, and then if they are, your per diem gets reduced. And,
Sure.
and that will be a cost savings to us.
Yep.
I'll just think of the recent IASB conference, right? You know, Matt had the UEN dinner provided and lunch, and so we shouldn't be reimbursing employees for meals that they don't have out-of-pocket expenses for.
I'm gonna note those for you.
Yeah.
Fair.
$59 we're gonna save the district. One traveler at a time.
Bought my own Starbucks, promise, yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely make a note
Yeah.
of that.
And then how it works, and on the travel reimbursement form that I fill, you just check, like,
Mhm.
these are the days that the meals were applied, and then the person cutting the check does the math. Super easy.
Agree, good point.
But Matt made a joke, but that isn't the point, right? Just because they travel doesn't mean that they automatically get this daily reimbursement. They still have to apply for it. So
Yep.
Matt said he bought his own coffee. On my travel days, I normally buy all my own stuff too. And so you're gonna sell people that are gonna do that. They're not going to just automatically see that show up. People do still have to provide some sort of entry to Adam's team for that.
And that'll even be necessary just simply to know
Right, to
that
know
somebody
that they're
needs to
going.
be reimbursed. So, yeah.
I have a question, or just wanted to note, page 97, that employee vaccination testing for COVID-19, we still require COVID-19 vaccinations? I'm just asking if that's still
I think there's a
something
clause in there that says as long as,
Yeah, didn't we have a timestamp
Yeah.
on that or something?
well, it,
I'm missing it, sorry.
Can you
I
tell me
think-
the page again, Maka?
Yeah, 97. I just read the related policies, so maybe that paragraph doesn't say what the one that Kim is talking about.
I think you guys are talking about on page 98, there's a paragraph at the end that it just says it's only in effect during as such time as OSHA is permitted by law to enforce the emergency temporary.
Okay.
I thought
There
we
you
could-
go.
I thought we
Yeah.
could have-
Yeah, because we
Okay.
couldn't have it, and then we went back to that.
And that's probably,
So this is not even.
That seems like 8 years ago.
yeah.
So I think we're okay.
Yeah,
If you guys
me
are
too.
comfortable with it, yeah.
The other item that there's a very subtle change to is if you're on the PDF version, page 179, it's way down there and under 415 related to competitive promotions. And it's just an addition of 2 words when you get to that point, so I see people scrolling, so I'll pause for a second. It's just related to when employees are competing for a job and it's a competitive promotion that they previously had said they shall receive a 10% increase. What we were just changing that to shall receive up to a 10% increase. It actually works better with a lot of our just structures for payments and different things of that nature. So I don't think it'll negatively impact anyone. It's more of just giving us a little more flexibility as we work through that. And when people competitively compete for a job, and they're kind of interviewing different things, that allows, especially for internal candidates, to have an opportunity to move within our pay structure and such. So that's the subtle change there. And the rest of this we're going to continue to work on and see and look at, because this is a newer portion of policy that was implemented last year, and just what that looks like and how we can continue to work through it for employees within the system.
Thank you.
Yep.
Does anyone have any other comments or questions about the 100 series? Okay. I think we'll wrap it up then. All right, very good. Our next policy and governance meeting is January
23rd.
January 23rd. Okay, very good. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
500s of this.
I move to
Yeah.
adjourn.
Oh,
I second it.
All in favor?
Whatever it is.
All right, thank you very much.